Hey guys, welcome back to my channel and welcome to another horror movie review. Now, in today's video, I am going to be taking a look at a horror classic, A Nightmare on Elm Street. In fact, I'm going to be reviewing the whole lot, starting with the original and then going in the order of the movie's release. Now, it's safe to say that I am a huge fan of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, even the bad ones. So, in 1984, Wes Craven brought us this horror masterpiece about a guy called Freddy Krueger who terrorizes and kills you in your dreams. And if you die in your dreams, then you die for real. I think what works well in this movie is that anything can happen. Freddy can pretty much jump out of the mirror, he can suck you into your bed, and he can pretty much turn into anything. The movie is just so different to your average slasher horror movie, and I think this is why it's such a huge hit with horror fans. So let's talk about some of the positives in this movie, and I'm gonna start with the characters. So we've got Tina, Rod, Glenn, who is played by a very young Johnny Depp, and of course Nancy as your main characters. We do also have Nancy's mum and Nancy's dad, who play their parts really well. Now, from the start, you would think that Tina is going to play the main protagonist. However, Tina meets a grisly end when she is the first to be killed off during a classic scene. So Tina's nightmare is just amazing. It's the first time we probably get to see Freddy Krueger, and it's absolutely terrifying. I would have loved to have been around in 1984 watching this in the cinema when you see Freddy walking down that dark alleyway with the super long arms. I just love the bit where Freddy is on top of Tina and Tina ends up ripping Freddy's face off. It's so cool and effective even in today's world. Of course, Tina is killed in that famous death scene where she is dragged up all around the bedroom and onto the ceiling, and she's pretty much sliced to bits. Boyfriend Rod ends up getting the blame because he was the only person in the bedroom with Tina, so he pretty much cops the blame. Rod also meets a horrible death when he falls asleep while he's locked up in the jail cell, when his blanket turns into a noose and it starts to wrap itself around Rod's neck while he sleeps. He then gets pulled off the bed and is hung in the cells just as the cops and Nancy are walking in, and of course this makes it look like that Rod has indeed hanged himself. So with Tina and Rod out of the way, Nancy, she ends up becoming the main protagonist and the final girl, and she is bloody brilliant at it. It's hard to think of Freddy Krueger without Nancy. Nancy is pretty much the Jamie Lee Curtis character in this movie. Now, I think my own personal favorite death scene in the movie has to be Glenn, because he ends up being pulled and sucked into his bed, and I can remember when I first saw this movie, I was really young and underage, and this scene actually scared the pants off me. For years, I was always scared that Freddy was going to pull me into the bed. I mean, it was just terrifying. And what follows next is a load of blood coming out of the hole of the bed, and it's literally oozing out like a fountain, hitting the ceiling, and it's just great. The music that they also use in this scene is just so memorable and crazy. I've always preferred Glenn's death scene to Tina's death scene. So let's talk about some of Nancy's nightmares, because she has quite a few in this movie. You have that epic one when Nancy falls asleep in class and then she ends up seeing Tina's dead body in the hallway being dragged around by an invisible force. Nancy ends up following Tina all the way down to the school boiler room where she meets Freddy for the first time, and Freddy ends up chasing Nancy all the way through this boiler room, and he ends up taunting her when she gets cornered, and it's just bloody brilliant. Another great one is when Nancy falls asleep on purpose and she gets her boyfriend Glenn to wake her up if he sees her, struggling while she's sleeping. And once again, we end up seeing Tina and some bugs. Freddy then pops out of the bushes and chases Nancy all the way home. The stairs then turn into porridge. Eventually, Freddy then jumps out of Nancy's mirror, where the pair of them end up rolling around all over the place, and once again, it's brilliant. So let's talk a little bit about Freddy's backstory, because where the hell did Freddy come from and why is he trying to kill the kids on Elm Street? Well, we learn from Nancy's mother that Freddy was once a child molester slash killer who almost got sent to prison, but someone forgot to sign the right papers and Freddy was freed. The parents of Springwood then took the law into their own hands and they hunted down Freddy and they ended up burning him alive. This is why Freddy is now back, haunting the kids' dreams and killing them off one by one. It's a great backstory. I mean, I know we've all heard this story many times over the years, but if you think about it, it really is a great backstory that explains really well where Freddy has come from and why he is doing what he's doing. A lot of horror movies these days, they just don't even bother going into the origins of the killer, and you know, they would rather have the origins of the killer used as a prequel later on down the line, and I'm just not a fan of prequels. I mean, just do it in the original movie. A Nightmare on Elm Street, in my opinion, did everything right. I really would have loved to have seen this movie in the cinemas back in 1984. I bet it was absolutely terrifying back then. There is literally like no CGI in this movie. I mean, I don't know when CGI came out, but they used proper old school effects in this movie, and it's just so much better than the CGI that we see in horror movies these days, and it's a lot more creative, especially when you watch the making of the Nightmare on Elm Street films. The final showdown between Nancy and Freddy is amazing. Nancy literally turns into Kevin from Home Alone, but on a more brutal scale, and she ends up setting up all these traps around the house, and she ends up pulling Freddy out of the nightmare, and Freddy then ends up being set on fire, and he then later on goes and attacks Nancy's mum while he's a burning blaze. And when we end up seeing the burnt corpse of Nancy's mother at the end of the movie, I can remember feeling quite disturbed when I first saw this. Now, don't forget, guys, I was pretty young when I first saw this movie. Like, I wasn't even a teenager. Nancy's mum then literally just sinks into the bed and disappears, which is a little bit strange. But then Nancy ends up taking back all of the power and the fear that she has given to Freddy, and she pretty much ends up defeating him, or so we thought. Now, this does lead me on to a little bit of a negative at this movie, just for me anyway. So, at the very end of this movie, Nancy and all her friends, they're back from the dead, and it's a hot, bright, sunny day. Nancy ends up jumping in the car with her friends, and then this car just ends up turning into Freddy. Now, I was always like a little bit confused, because didn't Freddy just get defeated? Anyway, what comes next is just even worse. It's ridiculous. Freddy's arm comes flying out of the front door window and pulls Nancy's mum through the window. But you can clearly tell that it is some sort of a rubber dummy. God. And when one of my friends first watched this movie with me, she ended up having a huge laughing fit, and she made me rewind that scene over and over again because my friend had literally just lost it in this final scene. This last scene in the movie, it does kind of feel as if the makers didn't know how to end the film. I think maybe they also wanted to create that one final jump scare moment, but for me personally, it just didn't work for me, and like I said, it was a little bit confusing with the car turning into Freddy. But aside from that, this is a fantastic horror classic masterpiece directed by the legend Wes Craven himself. I mean, the whole atmosphere of this movie is really creepy. I've actually got the Blu-ray collection of all of the Nightmare films, and when me and my other half put this movie on, you can tell that they really enhanced the Blu-ray version of this original movie. It's louder, the music is more powerful, you hear things that you wouldn't hear, and it creates one hell of a chilling atmosphere. I definitely recommend getting the Blu-ray collection if you don't already have it. By the way, A Nightmare on Elm Street is definitely a film to dig out on Halloween. I was genuinely terrified of Freddy Krueger after seeing this movie when I was just a kid. I was honestly terrified, and I can remember some crazy nightmares that I had over the years while I was growing up. truth, because I did go on to watch all of the Nightmare sequels before I was even a teenager. In fact, there is a bathtub scene when Nancy is taking a bath and Freddy's claw comes up from the water as she's falling asleep. I can remember being so scared of bathtubs for quite some time after this movie. In fact, I think the whole Nightmare movies, they pretty much made me terrified of bathrooms for quite a number of years. Now, as we all know, A Nightmare on Elm Street would go on to span a number of sequels, which I am going to review for you on this channel. But what I want to know now is, what do you guys think of this original classic? Do we have any Freddy fans here? If so, then let me know in the comments box below. Also, let me know which death scene is your favorite in this movie. Now, I know a lot of people say Tina, but for me personally, I've always preferred Glenn's death scene. Okay then guys, well, you've been watching me, Craig, reviewing A Nightmare on Elm Street. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, as I am going to be reviewing all of the Nightmare sequels, and you probably will not want to miss any of it. So hit that subscribe button, stay safe out there, and I will see you again very, very soon.